Hello and welcome to the DOE Laboratories of the Future workshop. Apologies, we had some technical difficulties. I'll give everyone a minute to trickle in. Okay, looks like the numbers are slowing down. So my name is Susanna Howison. I'm with the Office of Science, leading strategic planning and interagency coordination. We're very excited to have our sixth Laboratories of the Future workshop. And first, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Steve Finkley, who is our Director of the Office of Science, to kick us off.
Okay, can you hear my audio?
Sounds good.
Good. So thank you everyone for participating today. Welcome to the first Laboratories of the Future workshop of 2022. The DOE National Laboratories lead the world in science at scale and in operating national user facilities. As the laboratory complex enters its 8th decade, vestiges of its World War II roots remain. To ensure that the laboratories have the resources and structures needed to thrive for many decades to come, we are working to create a vision for the laboratories of the future. The overarching question we are posing as part of this exercise is, what would the DOE National Laboratories be like if we had the power to make them any way we wanted? We began this initiative in 2020 by reaching out to close to 200 stakeholders for their answers to these questions. We have also been holding workshops to disseminate the groundbreaking ideas that we have been collecting. As Susanna mentioned, this is our 6th Laboratories of the Future workshop. Previously, we've explored scientific architecture, the geography of innovation, the mechanics of innovation, researcher mental health, and work-life balance since the onset of the COVID pandemic, and effective teaming and virtual collaboration. Stay tuned for the announcement of the next workshop in this important series, and I'll turn it back over to Susanna.
Thank you so much, Steve. So today we're going to focus on mentorship at the laboratories as a mechanism for creating successful environments and inclusive cultures across all career types and levels. We will hear 4 presentations where the following topics will be discussed. How can the labs encourage a culture of intentional, inclusive, and effective mentorship across all career levels and types? What are the best practices, tools, and techniques for lab-based mentors? What role can mentorship, including peer mentorship across all career levels and types, play in creating inclusive environments and combating the effects of isolation? What are the best ways to evaluate mentoring outcomes? And what are the innovative mentorship practices, including virtual mentorship, that can be implemented in a lab-based environment? We're pleased that so many of you have joined us today and are looking forward to what is sure to be a fascinating set of presentations and robust discussion. We will have a moderated discussion at the end, so please type in your questions in the Q&A as they come to you. And yes, I realize the slides do not mirror what I'm saying. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So our first speaker today is Dr. Jennifer Stanford. She did her graduate training in cell and developmental biology, where she studied the regulation of CDC25 and WE1 and Xenopus egg cell cycles. Following her graduate training, she took her first postdoctoral teaching fellowship position at the Harvard Medical School, which formed the basis for the current Harvard Medical School Curriculum Fellows Program. She has held professional positions as an instructor at Harvard Medical School and assistant teaching professor at Drexel prior to her current position as an assistant professor in the biology department at Drexel. In 2015, she received the Alan Rothworth Award for Teaching Excellence, given annually to a faculty member at Drexel. Through her research activities and work as co-director of the Center for Advancement of STEM Teaching and Learning Excellence, or CASEL, she hopes to develop scalable and sustainable approaches to allow students to effectively understand STEM content and truly appreciate the importance and excitement of STEM fields. And with that, I will turn it over to her and Hopefully she can take control of the slide deck.
Thank you so much, Susanna. And those are my slides. So thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me to be here today. As Susanna mentioned, I'm Jen Stanford, and I'm an associate professor of biology and co-director for the center that was mentioned, Castle at Drexel. So Drexel's mascot are the dragons. And so we needed a castle at Drexel. And so we created this STEM center. And my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm really excited to have been invited here today and to have the opportunity to discuss the importance of mentorship in effective and inclusive STEM education. So thanks for this opportunity. And I'm really also very excited to hear from from the other terrific panelists as well. So it should be a great session. Can you go to the next slide, please? So in this talk, I'm going to lay out the importance of effective and inclusive mentorship and provide some ideas of best practices and important considerations for success in mentorship. And while I'm going to start with some of the challenges in STEM education, I think these are important for the broader scientific community to understand because there are important implications for our ability to do our best work as a community. And as scientists, we can all contribute to improving the culture towards engaging and retaining excellent future scientists. And my focus today is on undergraduate mentorship, but some of my tips and suggestions could be applicable to any type of mentorship relationship. Next slide, please. So why should we be concerned with effective inclusive mentorship? Now, we may naturally care about these issues and want to get better at what we do, but we should also take a broader view of this problem because not everyone feels that way. And it's important to be clear on why we should continually reflect on and try to improve our approaches. So based on census data up through 2019, only around 30% of adults over the age of 25 in this country are college educated. But there's increasing demand for college educated employees. And if we look at this data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, for entry-level jobs, most of the projected growth is largely with positions that require some higher education training. Next slide, please. Projections from the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce have indicated that around 65% of all jobs will require some college education, but only around 33% of Americans hold a bachelor's degree. And so this is referred to as the jobs degree gap. And if we take this together, there's a disconnect between the education level of our national public and the jobs available in this country. And to address these issues, we either need to increase the number of jobs for people who do not have college degrees, or we need to increase the number of people going to and completing college degrees. So next slide, please. And so in thinking of that, according to the National Center for Education Statistics, we have about 20 million students a year going to college. But of course, of those students who begin a college degree, not all finish. And these data are looking at how many students completed an associate's degree from a 2-year college within 3 years on the left, and how many completed a bachelor's degree from a 4-year college within 6 years on the right. And so graduation rates are around 30% for associate's degrees and around 60% for bachelor's degrees. So we have a good number of students going to college, but graduation rates nationally need to be improved to support national workforce needs. And these issues are even more apparent in the STEM fields. And many academic institutions are trying to do a variety of things to improve student retention, both overall and within the STEM disciplines as a result. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that these issues are even more pronounced in STEM disciplines, and even more so for individuals from racial and ethnic groups that are underrepresented in STEM. So while 32% of the US population is from a racial or ethnic group that's underrepresented in STEM, only 22% or less of degree earners are from these racial and ethnic groups. And additionally, there are even fewer earning degrees in STEM and higher degrees. So if you look at this chart, basically we have non-STEM degrees are the dotted lines, the solid lines are STEM degrees, the purple lines are bachelor's, the blue is master's, and the pink is doctorate degrees. Now, STEM jobs on average are higher paying than non-STEM jobs, and these are primarily only accessible with some college training. But students from backgrounds that are underrepresented in STEM aren't attending college or earning STEM degrees at a level that's proportionate to their population. We're seeing some increases over time, which is great, but we still have more work to do in this regard. Next slide, please. So why is this important? So there have been a lot of articles written about this, and they indicate important issues relating to output. So Kenny Gibbs from the National Institute of General Medical Sciences has written about this topic a lot. And he has an article called Diversity in STEM, What It Is and Why It Matters, and it's really worth reading. And in this article, he indicates that diversity is critical to excellence in STEM because we need diverse problem solvers to solve difficult problems. He mentions that lack of diversity represents loss of talent. When people leave, we're missing critical contributors who had important and relevant training. And he mentions that diversity is important for economic growth and global competitiveness. Our STEM workforce doesn't reflect our national population, so it's unlikely that this is the best possible workforce that it could be. Next slide, please. But in addition to these output reasons, up one back, please. The way that our systems are structured makes it so that some types of people feel welcome in STEM learning environments and some don't. Some people feel that they can't succeed because of something about their identity that has nothing to do with the discipline in which they're working. And isn't that a problem in and of itself, regardless of the output of the system? So it's really important to look at our context and question if they've been structured to exclude people for the wrong reasons. So I got into science because I was really excited about science as a kid. I was excited about learning it, doing it, thinking about becoming a scientist. And it's upsetting for me to see that trainees and professionals who have that same passion can feel discouraged and plagued by imposter syndrome, not because they're not good enough or capable of success, but because they get thousands of messages every day that suggest they don't belong or can't be successful. And it's really hard to ignore those messages. So diversity, equity, and inclusion matter for multiple reasons, and it's important to think about these issues in our work. Next slide, please. So why am I mentioning these problems with student retention and education to this group? Well, certainly academic institutions need to contribute to addressing these problems, and they are working on these issues and thinking about them. The broader community of scientists can and do help. And we can see how, in part, by looking at the reasons why students leave STEM. Some of these are specific to academia, like the cost of education and how courses are taught. But some of these are about students feeling like they can succeed, that they have support, that they understand their discipline and feel identity with it, and they have a community supporting them. And these supports don't have to come solely from the institution where these students go to school. One way to address these needs is through research experiences which allow students to make those connections. Next slide, please. So research experiences can have important positive effects on student retention. They can provide mentorship and community that helps students to feel supported or feel like they can be successful, and to better understand their field of interest and how they can navigate that field. And those experiences can take place in many different contexts, both within and outside of a student's primary institution. Next slide, please. Some of the known benefits of research include increasing student empowerment and confidence in a variety of issues, increasing interest in graduate careers, promoting understanding of research, and it's been demonstrated that research experiences can be disproportionately beneficial for students who have identities that are underrepresented in science. Next slide, please. So I've been talking a lot about what we know from the literature, or giving a little flavor of that, but I wanted to spend a little time talking about what I know from my own work. So at Drexel University, we have the STAR Scholars Program, which is an undergraduate summer research program. This program takes place in the summer after the freshman year. It lasts 10 weeks, and it typically engages high achieving students. One thing that's somewhat unique about the program compared to other programs of this type at other institutions is when it's offered, but also it happens to engage STEM and non-STEM students from Drexel. Next slide, please. So this program currently supports about 5% of the freshmen at Drexel, and students in the program have a 96% retention rate. My group has previously done work to study this program, and we found that students report gains in all skills assessed. And interestingly, there are very few differences between STEM and non-STEM students with regards to learning gains, suggesting that everyone is really having benefit from engaging in this type of experience. So this is a great program, but it only supports about 5% of the students. And our findings suggest it benefits everyone who participates, which completely fits with what's in the literature from other studies. And so therefore, it seems logical that we would want to expand access to this type of experience. Next slide, please. So undergraduate research has been effectively shown by many groups to lead to important gains. Oops, I think go back a slide, please. Thank you. To lead to important learning gains for students. And as a result, the benefits of these experiences shouldn't be limited to a relatively small group of students. As one example of this, research experiences have been shown to be beneficial in encouraging students from underrepresented identities to continue in science. So this is merely one example of how expanding access to research could have an important impact. And so therefore, it would be great to be able to expand access to undergraduate research to ensure that we can provide these types of important experiences to as many students as possible. And so how can we do that? Well, obviously academic institutions can try to offer more one-on-one research experiences, but there are limits to what we can do in that arena. As you well know, labs outside of academic institutions can provide experiences, and thank you for your efforts in this regard. We can also develop courses that allow students to engage in authentic undergraduate research, and a number of schools and groups are doing this now. In these contexts, students spend less overall time in the lab, but we can support more students through this type of approach, and my group's recent work suggests that these courses reach different populations of students. Work from my group and others have found similar outcomes from these experiences compared with traditional mentored research. And so we could be creative in working with labs outside of academic institutions to potentially provide additional courses of this type, perhaps, and that's something that could be explored. Next slide, please. So all of these research experiences involve mentoring. So what is it about mentoring that's important? And if we go back to thinking about why students leave STEM fields, in part, it's about connection, guidance, and support. And a mentor can provide these things as well as knowledge and a structure for the learning experience. And this can be really validating for the student and can help to address issues of imposter syndrome. So if an expert is encouraging and supportive and gives clear evidence and guidance for success, then a student will have a better understanding of their abilities and what they need to do to make it in their chosen field. In part, this is the socio-emotional support that students need in science. Science is difficult, and validating that and contextualizing failures can be really helpful in addition to training on standard things like research ethics, how to use equipment, how to conduct an experiment, for example. There's evidence in the literature that this mentorship is critically important for students coming from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups who may have additional issues with belongingness and understanding their capacity for success, which can be addressed with effective mentorship. Next slide, please. So research experiences are a type of experiential learning, and experiential learning was carefully defined as part of a conference run by the Colonial Academic Alliance in 2016. About 100 participants at this conference were asked to engage in an exercise on the activities and characteristics that define experiential learning. And this is the definition on the slide that resulted from this exercise. I'm not going to read it for you now, but it's basically the idea of learning by doing. And the development of this definition was led by the executive director of the Colonial Academic Alliance, Lindsay Interlante. So research is a type of experiential learning, but there are many others: study abroad, internships, community service activities, etc. Next slide, please. And so the team shown here has been interested in understanding the benefits of experiential learning and which are necessary for particular outcomes for students, such as increased retention and improved learning in particular areas. And so we have a broad team representing multiple institutions and the Colonial Academic Alliance. Next slide, please. And this team has developed a new tool to study the impact of experiential learning to allow groups to better understand outcomes from their experiential learning programs and allow for more careful study of these types of programs in comparison to each other to identify common and unique outcomes. And so through the use of this new tool, we hope to answer questions about the core elements of an experiential learning opportunity that are critical for success. And one of the major foci for this new tool is the role of mentorship. At present, we have a survey instrument that takes about 10 minutes to complete. It's been validated in multiple ways. We're still working on that validation. And we've just recently rolled this instrument out with a larger population of students for further testing. We plan to ask larger questions about the role of mentorship and experiential learning, among other questions. Understanding the core beneficial aspects of experiential learning will help with training others about effective experiences, and will also help with our thinking about how we can expand opportunities to benefit students. Next slide, please. With that said, we know a lot about the best practices for undergraduate research mentoring, which I know some of my co-panelists are likely going to discuss as well. And I really like the overview that colleagues at Elon University have put together based on an extensive review of the literature. In brief, these include identifying student needs and interests, to personalize the experience to best meet their needs, setting clear expectations for students so that they can understand how they can be successful, teaching students skills, methods, and techniques so that they have the capacity to be successful, having high expectations of students, but also providing emotional support, thus acknowledging the challenges of research and working through them as a team, building community, which I'll talk more about in a moment, having one-on-one time with students, increasing student ownership of their project over time, supporting their professional development, giving them opportunities to mentor and giving them support in that process as appropriate, and encouraging them to disseminate their findings. Next slide, please. So what about inclusive mentoring? Again, my co-panelists are likely to discuss this as well, but there's a great handbook on this from a group at Georgia College that's available online. And they discuss some additional best practices for inclusivity. So to be inclusive, we may or may not have the same racial, ethnic, or gender identities as our mentees. And we need to recognize these different identities and exhibit cultural sensitivity in these interactions. Criticism should be paired with reassurance in all mentoring relationship, but this can be especially true when working with students who have identities that are underrepresented in STEM. These students often feel the lack of belongingness in the spaces that they're in and can sometimes link criticism with other concerns they have about their lack of belongingness. So this can sort of reaffirm their imposter syndrome for them. But if it's paired with reassurance that the mentor believes the student can be successful, this can potentially remove negative impacts. So communication and mutual trust is important and may need to be built over time. Students who are resistant to mentorship aren't always resistant because they don't care. It may be because they had a negative experience in the past and they need that trust to be built before they can engage effectively. Or it could be due to stereotype threat. And so it's important to avoid making assumptions and instead work on that communication and try to build trust. Next slide, please. So in addition to the importance of mentorship, community is hugely important, and the mentor can be a driver for that community. Communities can provide support, identity development, and safety for their members. Communities can allow people to get training, receive feedback, learn about new things. And communities can allow for vertical mentoring where a professional scientist has mentored someone, a student, for a while, and that student can now help with mentoring other new students that come into the environment. And this type of mentorship can provide social and academic support as well. Mentors can create spaces and should create spaces like this in their lab and can be responsible and should be responsible for establishing a healthy and inclusive culture. But there are other types of community that can be built to help with student mentoring as well. You can have cohorts of students engaging in research within a program, like a summer research program, for example, and they can have support from near peer mentors or a community mentor, and that can provide additional identity for the students as part of that program. You can also have cohorts of mentors who are trying to learn how to improve their skills, as in part is happening here today. And that's a great way to provide identity to individuals as mentors and can provide support for mentorship and learning opportunities that allow mentors to be more successful in that role. Next slide, please. So it's useful to think deliberately about whether and how to form these communities. It's certainly important to form a community within the lab, but additional support, as I mentioned, could come from cohorting within a summer research program where perhaps everyone needs to learn similar skills or talk about similar issues like research ethics or lab safety, or perhaps something like imposter syndrome. And bringing the cohort together can lead to efficiencies and provide participants with another community for social support. Mentors can form communities that could be important for their own learning and support as well. And while there were many negatives about the pandemic, one positive is that we're more comfortable and familiar with remote ways to engage. So you can make use of the virtual space to form any and all of these types of communities. So for example, you could use a communication platform like Slack or Teams to allow your lab members to engage whether or not they're in the same physical space, or perhaps to allow members of a summer research cohort to connect with one another. As another example, maybe you want to consider cross-institution cohorting to bring together everyone who's engaged in a summer research program across multiple institutions, regardless of where they're physically located. And you could do this using tools like Zoom. In all cases, you should really think about your goals for community building and provide structure to get that community started to meet those goals. And then empower your community members to engage in creating the community they want. Next slide, please. As a final note, I just really wanted to emphasize the importance of training. In many cases as scientists, we have not been formally trained in how to teach or mentor. We've seen models, but we haven't actually received formal training on how to do these things properly. As well, we haven't necessarily been trained in the cultural competence we need to be effective at creating inclusive spaces and mentoring inclusively. There are bodies of literature on these subjects, and there are right ways to do this that can be learned, so we should learn. And importantly, I think it's useful to have a growth mindset about this and realize that skills can be learned. We can get better at these things. And there's information that can be provided to help us in that and support as well. And some of the recent work from my group suggests that, not surprisingly, opportunities for self-reflection, engaging with those who have knowledge in these areas, and participating in a community of practice can be helpful in leading to growth of our skills in these areas. And with that, last slide, I just want to thank you for having me here today and acknowledge the people and organizations who supported my work. Thank you, and I look forward to discussing this more with you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful, and what a great way to kick it off. It looks like Dr. Gates's video is working, so I'll just quickly introduce her. So Dr. Ann Gates serves as the Vice Provost at the University of Texas at El Paso. She joined the UTEP faculty as an Assistant Professor of Computer Science in 1994 and was promoted to Professor and Chair of the Department of Computer Science in 2005. She served as the Associate Vice President for Research and Sponsored Projects from 2008 to 2012, and then returned to her position as Department Chair until 2019. She earned her doctoral degree in computer science from New Mexico State University, a master's degree in computer science from UTEP, and a bachelor's degree in mathematics and biology from UTEP. She is the founding member and lead of the Computing Alliance of Hispanic Serving Institutions, a nationally recognized network of more than 60 colleges, universities, and stakeholders that focus on the recruitment, retention, mentorship, and advancement of Hispanics in computing. And then she is also the director and lead principal investigator of the NSF-funded CyberShare Center of Excellence at UTEP, which is nationally known for the study of collaborative science and engineering and develops and applies models of team-based cooperative learning, interdisciplinary teamwork, and knowledge integration and management. Oh, and one more note, it looks like we do not have a Q&A box on this webinar, so just put any questions you have in the chat. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Gates. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susanna. And I really appreciate Jen's presentation because she really laid the foundation on why this work is so important and why DEI matters. What I'm going to do in this presentation is I'm going to give this bigger overview, and then I'll follow it by the work that we're doing through the Computing Alliance on our model for undergraduate research. So this is the big picture. Why is it really important for us to be thinking about inclusive excellence, not just in the mentoring programs, but thinking about it much more broadly? So Jen talked about the drivers, right? Why is DEI important? There's a need for more inclusive workforce. There's persistent disparities in STEM. The value of bringing in these different perspectives as we work on decision making, and then building a sense of identity and belonging is really a business narrative. So when you're looking at your organization, whether it's the organization or unit within the organization, these are the three primary elements that are components that should be present. Organizational culture is really speaking to the importance of leadership and the messaging that comes from leadership around diversity, equity, inclusion, and then the accountability that is in place to hold other administrators, managers, whoever the personnel are, accountable for their contributions, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's also, a shared vision, there's buy-in. When we look at behavior, we're really talking about examining the professional norms within an organization and then changing those that limit our ability to be able to act in ways that are conducive to inclusive excellence. We're looking at hiring practices. You're looking at workload, performance evaluation. You're also recognizing that there's a political part of this. There's a power base, but also how do you mobilize those people that are change agents? And then how do you build the trust and respect to make change? The indicators of success are the measures that are used to help know where you're at as an organization or as a unit. We could be looking at demographic data, but we want to make sure that we're looking through an intersectionality lens, not just looking at women, but looking at women of color and the various things that across the whole unit. So if you're looking at a university, it's not just faculty, but it's the staff, it's the students. If you're looking at the lab, it's going to be the same. So looking at lab climate, looking at the professional development that is provided. This work is coming from the American Association for Colleges and Universities. I have a citation there. I am part of the NASM, National Academy for Science, Engineering, and Medicine, that looked at transforming trajectories for women of color in tech. The report just came out. We have been debriefing the White House, Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, and Nist, and we'll be doing other disseminations of this work. And then I also want to point you to the ACT report that is put on by a large group of people around industry and technology, making a lot of very insightful recommendations of what needs to happen around diversity, equity, inclusion. And what I spoke about with the inclusive excellence model is really models what is coming out in those two reports. So with that, I want to talk about the Affinity Research Group model. This model was developed at UTEP many years ago, over 20 years ago. When we became an alliance, we started to look at what types of models that we have that are making a difference when we look at recruitment, retention, and advancement of Hispanics in computing. The ARG model was then disseminated across our members, and we have a significant amount of research that shows its effectiveness. It's looked at as a comprehensive model that is building dynamic, productive, and inclusive research groups. The work that we do is done very deliberately. As we go through this, you'll see what I mean when I say that, but it's around creating groups that have a particular affinity, and the affinity is typically around a research project. It really thinks about how do you consciously think about developing students' disciplinary knowledge, their research abilities, and their team skills. And with that, they end up with a sense of identity and belonging and how we are structured. So our goal, as I mentioned, is purposely and intentionally developing their student skills and their through active engagement. And and then moving them on to advanced studies, helping them understand the importance of research. If they don't go to graduate school, then certainly the skills that are learned in undergraduate research transfer to the workforce. When we looked at the model was created based on the research at that time on Hispanics, where a lot of the Hispanics or institutions, students would come in and they wouldn't stay, they had to work, they had family obligations. So there was really not a home at the university. And so one of the things that the research showed by Dr. Rodriguez was that it's really important that students have mentors and role models that look like them, that they become part of a student culture, that there is faculty and student interaction outside of the classroom. One of the indicators for students leaving was that they would set unrealistic goals, and if they couldn't achieve them, then they would drop out. So what you see on the vertical is that we started to focus on research and technical skills, and then communication and team skills. When you look at our model, it's a non-hierarchical model in that you don't have graduate students overseeing undergraduates, PhD overseeing masters seeing undergraduate. We look at it as very integrated. You'll see that it's a collection of best practices. There's nothing, you'll look at a lot of models and you'll see very much similarities. It's really meant to be a compendium of other practices. It's based on cooperative group interaction, and we provide support structures. So our premise is that if we want to expand participation, then we cannot just be looking at the best and the brightest, and just reach out to those students. We really need to find the students that have the capability, but perhaps not the competence. And that's what we do in this particular model. I show this as a very general overview of some of the components. At the center, it's based on core purpose that one would set within their research group. It's about building the connectedness among the students. I think Jen talked about that. You're creating this culture. Students are supporting each other, if you will. And then you're focused on skills. We have an annual orientation as part of the model where students learn about the ARC philosophy. They understand this is how we're operating as our research group. It's focused on team building. It's focused on just giving them some basic skills to start off. What we do is we have the students, even that are coming back, are part of the orientation, and they are continually learning and sharing their own experiences. There's regular group meetings focused on problem solving, building domain expertise, really counting on students to begin to verbally describe their knowledge. Especially as new people are coming in, they could explain to that new person what the terminology means, some approach. The idea is to get them talking, gently correcting them if that's needed, or turning to someone to add to what they're saying. There's a project management aspect on this, setting clear goals, defining activities. And then there's a series of workshops that we do that are developing students' expertise. When we look at the core values of an ARC, so not a particular research group, but at the model itself, it's centered on student success, the deliberate development of skills. It's based on building cooperation in all things that we do, mutual respect of opinions and ideas, promotive interaction and positive interdependence, things that I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a minute. And the fact that we always strive for excellence and we strive to achieve it in everything that we do. So I mentioned earlier that the ARG model is based on cooperative elements, and it's really cooperative learning. It's the work of Carl Smith and Johnson & Johnson. And so we have based this as a foundation, and it has been highly effective. It is people who have gone through this training know that the mnemonic is pig's face. Positive independence, individual accountability, group processing, professional skills, and face-to-face promotive interaction. And I'm going to go over those briefly. Positive interdependence means that within your team, within your research, you want everyone to supporting everyone else. The success of the group is because of, the success that one has is the success of the group. So it's not a I, me, it's around how are we moving research and what is your contributions to that. So everyone is together. It's structured in a numbers of ways by having a team identity, having a particular name for your research group, having the students understand what the goals are, making sure that there are assigned roles and people understand those roles. There's a number of things that you can do to structure positive interdependence. While you're working as a team and everyone's receiving credit as a team, if you will, there is individual accountability. You have to hold the members of that research group accountable for the work. And so there's a number of ways that could be structured. It could be structured through reporting at meetings. It could be structured. I'll show you a way that we have done it recently through a report mechanism in the research plan. But students need to have concrete tasks and deadlines. What we learned very early when we started the model from our formative evaluation, that sometimes students didn't really understand why they were doing what they were doing. Especially undergraduate students with not a lot of experience felt like it might be busy work. So it was really important that we began to show their value and contributions and that they understand that mapping of what they're doing. Promotive interaction is what it says, right? You are making sure that you are acknowledging the work that people are doing. And it can be done through an annual meeting. It can be done through the regular meetings that you have, but really acknowledging what people are contributing and understanding the importance of constructive critique. I think one of the most important aspects of this model is constructive critique. How do you help students understand the importance of providing whatever deliverable they have and receiving constructive critique and understanding what that critique means, whether it's around their oral or written participation or maybe the technical aspects of their work. The other thing that is critical is group processing. And I really like to look at this. I mean, it's the same as reflection. Reflection, we know, is a high impact practice. How do you reflect on how things are working? Now, this is a student could do it, the team can do it, and simple questions are what worked? We went through a whole series of things, what worked, what didn't work, how can you improve? It's really how can we improve, and then how do we reflect on that, plan and improve. It's like the Deming model. But it's so important that students understand and reflect on what they're learning. And so I like to provide this quote that you do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on that experience. When we talk about the social and professional skills, one of the things that is important is not to assume that those that are joining the group have the necessary skills to be successful. And we have learned that this is true whether it's an undergraduate or graduate student. Many people need to continue to improve and continue to learn. So we understand, we focus in the orientation of helping students understand the need to learn and practice a skill. When you look at cooperative teams and the way it's modeled, is that there's 4 elements of learning, of building a team. And there's the basic skills, and then the skills to function, and so forth, for mentee skills. So we go through those. We make sure that in team meetings, students understand what was decided, the action items, meeting minutes become very important. We talk about playing devil's advocate as a skill, probing, how to ask a probing question is an important skill, how to, there's a variety of them, how to paraphrase, to show understanding. So we practice these in a very deliberate manner. And so there's a set of research skills that you can have, team management skills, communication skills are all based around constructive critique. When we are looking, here's some examples that we work with, especially undergraduates. How do you write a personal statement? And then we work with them on providing that feedback. We have a whole other model called FellowNet, where we work with students on putting together competitive scholarship fellowship opportunities like the GRFP that comes from NSF. How to write an abstract, how to set clear goals and objectives. But this visual is meant to show you that it's about them writing, getting the critique, getting this review back, and then rewriting, getting the critique and the review. It's very iterative. We even show students how the faculty researchers that as they're writing papers, how those evolve over time and how we redline, the paper so that they understand that this is a process. It has nothing to do, it's not personal, it's about growth. And so when we look at this model, we take this approach that you might be familiar with. And that is when we begin to do the training on what it means to do an ARG model. And I will say that we provide, we do training at the national level. It was based on computer science, but it has been adopted broadly across nursing and other STEM fields, and it's been adopted in how people run a teaching and learning center. But you start off saying that you don't know what you don't know, and so we don't know that what these skills mean until we start looking at them, and then it becomes very conscious in how we run our meetings. We very consciously think about a particular skill that we want the students to develop, but we're still not competent in doing that. We get to the point where we have to think about it, we plan it, we become competent. But when you really get to this last level, you are running your meetings in a way that you're not thinking about it. It's just automatic. You're calling on students. You're teaching the skills very deliberately. Here are a number of publications that you might want to look at. I won't go over into the work we have done. There was this extensive study done by Heather Theory, who comes from the University of Colorado Boulder, using the undergraduate research student self-assessment instrument, looking at how students working in the ARG model against those national RUs, mainly from the NSF. We have the journal article is also looking at the theoretical foundation and basis for the work, and then does a retrospective study on the students and where they're at now. And then we have a Kerr paper. All of these are old, and we've been doing this for a long time. So I welcome you to look at it. One of the questions that we were asked around working virtually, and so I wanted to talk about how we did a virtual RU program. The purpose of this program was to provide students with experience. In the early time of COVID, we received funding from the NSF because there were a lot of students that were losing research experiences and internships. So we put in some funding to start this program and to work with the faculty mentors across CASI institutions to really disseminate the ARG model and to have help them define a research project. And then we wanted to build on this national community of faculty and undergraduate researchers. CASI does support communities of practice and a variety of efforts that we do, that we work on. One is with a Google CASI problem solving, 1 credit hour course that has been very impactful. But we really wanted to build this community and then focus on developing the research capacity across CASI institutions. So those that did not have graduate programs in particular. Here's just a summary. It was an 8-week effort. It was, here's our curriculum. So what we did, so as I mentioned, we do present CASI ARG workshops. They can be anywhere from 3 days to 4 hours. There's a variety that we provide. What we wanted to do is do a very quick model, so we knew everyone's time was very valuable. So what we did is we met with the researchers a half an hour every week, and we would share with them the materials that we have on undergraduate research. So we have materials around how to write an abstract, how to develop a pitch, how to posters critique. So what we did is that we provided them with materials, and then every week we went through these, and then we invited them to now work with their students that they were mentoring. So this was worked very well. I mentioned that we do have a handbook. It is available through Amazon if there's any interest. One of the things that we provided students was very early on was a research journal. We asked them every week, this is part of the reflection, what did they work on? What did they learn? We really wanted them to be thinking about research very deliberately. It also provided us an opportunity at our weekly meetings to address problems that the faculty were seeing as they were mentoring the students. And I failed to mention that we were not just disseminating information out, we were also, faculty were sharing their best practices. As I mentioned, it's about us learning from each other. Students submitted this journal at the end of the week. We reviewed it. Everything was in a OneNote notebook so that the backbone would go in to see how everyone was doing and whether they were keeping up. That was the accountability piece on our part. Here's some results from the virtual REU program. The questions that were asked to the students in my experience, or because of my experience, whether they agreed that they felt more prepared for graduate school, for advanced computer science work, knowledge about career options, and then and being able to move into a career. And you can see from the green to the right, the purple and the turquoise, there was some, it did have an impact. And what came from our evaluators was that the online format was viable. They got comparable results as those that were in person. The faculty stated in focus groups that they really appreciated having structure, having the resources for the students, and then access to discuss with their peers. So here's my contact information. Again, here's the name of the handbook that we have out, and I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gates. That was fascinating. And thank you also for including the information about the virtual program. I'm sure that is very relevant to many people on the call today.
Yeah, thank you. Here, I'll stop sharing.
Going to make, all right. So Dr. Pritchett, you should be able to turn on your video now. Yes, there you are. Great. And do you want us to run the slides, or would you like to do it yourself?
I'm going from the browser, so it may be better for you all to share them. Let's see.
Yes, we are happy to.
Yeah, it'd probably be better just to have you all share. And I apologize for the typo on the first slide of the loft as opposed to LOTF.
You are not the first person that has done that, so, including some of us. So thank you so much for joining us. Just to give a quick introduction, Dr. Janita Pritchett is the Senior Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategist at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or Nist, in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She began her tenure at Nist as a National Research Council postdoctoral fellow working on a number of forensics-related projects. She has served as a research mentor and advisor for the Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship Program, SURF, and the Montgomery College Internship Program at Nist. During her spare time, she also does outreach and demos at local schools and churches. Additionally, Dr. Pritchett has worked as an adjunct lecturer at Montgomery College, teaching general chemistry since 2012. She obtained her BS in professional chemistry from Tennessee State University in 2005 and her PhD at the University of Illinois at Chicago in 2011. With that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Hopefully everyone can see and hear me. Once again, thank you to the organizers for inviting me into this space. And it's just been amazing hearing from our first two speakers, just really laying the foundation for the why mentoring is important, especially as we try to diversify the STEM ecosystem. So I'm going to be speaking today just from some of the experiences we've learned at Nist, especially in my role as an academic program manager in the International Academic Affairs Office. We've really looked to leaning into mentoring and also coaching to help us to cultivate an inclusive workplace. So if you could advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. So for those of you that are not familiar with Nist, Nist stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And I like to always talk about us as the most unknown known agency. We touch pretty much every aspect of your life, but a lot of people have no clue who we are or where we're located. Nist is actually a non-regulatory federal agency that's found within the U.S. Department of Commerce. And we were founded in 1901 as the National Bureau of Standards. Our mission is to promote U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness by advancing measurement science, standards, and technology in ways that enhance economic security and improve our overall quality of life. And then I thought it would be important, especially in the context of today's conversation about inclusivity, to share our core values. So we are an organization with strong values, both reflected in the history and our current work. And our leadership and staff uphold these values to ensure a high-performing environment that is both safe and respectful for all. And so these values include perseverance, integrity, inclusivity, and excellence. And so I thought it was good to show that from top down, we do have leadership support and really trying to drive this idea of creating not only a diverse workforce, but an inclusive workforce. If we could advance to the next slide, please. So as you heard in my my intro, I actually started my career as a research chemist at Nist in the NRC postdoc program. I know there may be a few people in here as well. I saw one of the former postdocs that was also in here as well. But the postdoc program is a really, really great program, great for launching your career. And as I've matriculated through my own personal career, I then ended up actually managing the program that brought me to the organization. So the thing that I recognized most when I first actually joined the office that was managing the program was the fact that when I read a lot of the outgoing exit surveys, that many of my peers were stating how they simply did not have some of the support that they were looking for from their advisors. They weren't receiving things like motivation or advice on how to, what's next, what's my next step. They weren't really getting clear guidance on direction or really even feeling like they had that, someone tapping on them to really unlock that potential. So my first mission whenever I joined that office was to really take the program to the next level. We were doing excellent in actually creating an opportunity for people to hone in on their research skills, but that ability to really support and help other people navigate the careers was lacking. And so I really launched two different efforts, one which was focused on creating a career coaching program for our postdoc community, but then also creating a training model or several training models that our advisor community would be able to access to really sharpen their coaching and mentoring skills. So if you could advance to the next slide, you may be asking yourself, well, mentoring and coaching, what's the difference? Because oftentimes you hear those words being used interchangeably. And from the advisor concept, it is important that an advisor that's working with, especially early career staff, that you have the ability to do both. So I wanted to take a quick moment to just talk about the differences between the two, and then we'll talk about some of the tactical things that we've helped our advisors to add to their portfolio so that they can engage with their postdocs and early career scientists in a much better manner. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we've heard a lot about mentoring today, and as you guys should have learned, that mentoring really is a learning relationship. It's often focused on some type of long-term career development, and really the primary purpose is to drive personal growth, building skills, knowledge, and understanding. So a lot of times your mentor is probably someone that has walked the walk that you're trying to go on. They're there to be able to offer specific guidance or you really help you avoid certain pitfalls or barriers that you may be facing throughout your career. Now, coaching is a little different. Coaching is a little different. The International Coaching Federation defines coaching as partnering, right? So it's really this idea of partnering with the person through a thought-provoking and creative process. I always like to think of it from the stance of like, it's the person that's going to kind of hold up that mirror to help you to understand what drives you. Why do you value certain things? Why do you do certain behaviors? And perhaps are there certain things you should be starting, stopping, or continuing doing to really unlock and maximize your personal and professional potential? Coaching really is, to me, one of the best resources that you can have in your arsenal when you think about your kind of personal board of directors of people that can really help to tap into those sources of imagination, productivity, and leadership. And so the thing we try to instill in our advisor community that works with not only just our postdocs, but also our undergraduates, our high school students, and our early career scientists is this idea of being able to fluctuate between both of these skill sets in order to drive meaningful relationships and help build the future workforce. If we could go to the next slide, thank you. So, there's a lot of emphasis right now on creating a diverse workforce, making sure that we have representation across the board. And that's great. That is absolutely something that we need to do. But there's also a need to ensure that employees feel a sense of belonging, valued, and supported throughout their journeys. And really, at the end of the day, coaching and mentoring have been shown to be two highly impactful strategies to creating this inclusive culture and help to meet these diversity goals. It can help to ensure that there's meaningful interactions between individuals of different generations, genders, and races. It really can help to support the retention of employees. So we don't only want to just get people into the building, but we want to keep them. And there's evidence that shows that mentoring and coaching can have grand impact, especially for those from underrepresented groups. And then last but not least, of course, it's going to help to support individuals' professional growth, organizational development, and the overall success of the enterprise. So that's kind of that business case, the why we should be doing it. If we could go to the next slide. So the next part of my talk, I'm really just going to be kind of giving you some highlights from the training modules that we offer to our communities, with the hope that for any mentors that may be on this call or new advisors that may be on the call, there may be some quick tactical things you can start doing right now to help improve the relationships that you have with those that you are working with. And so whether you're an advisor, a mentor, whatever word you're using to describe the relationship that you have with someone that you're working with, the general arc of that engagement kind of remains the same. There is a high need for making sure you establish trust at the beginning. And I believe our first speaker spoke to that in great detail. And it's really this idea of sharing with each other, getting familiar with each other, and discussing working norms. I have found that so many breakdowns in communication could have been avoided simply by having some conversations early on to discuss what kind of working situations do you need to be successful, both from the advisor or the mentor and from the mentee. You then go into this idea of designing a plan for action. And it's really important for the mentor or the advisor to encourage the mentee to really begin with the end in mind. What is their North Star that they're working towards? And what goals should they be setting to help them get there? And the mentor or advisor play a critical role in helping to set feasible goals and things that are attainable, hopefully using that SMART goal framework. Then after that, it's time to execute and do the work. And so the mentor or advisor should be hosting ability to regularly check in and revise the plan as needed. And then last but not least, ensuring that as that relationship is coming to a close, that throughout the entire engagement, there have been opportunities to reflect, as was mentioned earlier in the second talk, but also celebrating the wins and showing appreciation for all the support that's been happening throughout their engagement. So if we could go to the next step. So in our training that we offer to our mentors, and again, we've been offering these trainings now since 2018 to our advisor community. This is one of the kind of frameworks that we like to show our advisors to really help them understand the scope of the role that they play in shaping a mentee's experience within the organization. So of course, as the mentor, you're going to be teaching, consulting, and advising on a particular topic. So that's giving direct advice, helping them to brainstorm about different things, and really helping drive accomplishments on a specific topic. But there's also that need to be able to switch into that coaching mode, more inquisitive, helping to pull out information from a mentee so that they can then decide how to approach a topic that best suits their needs as well. And a lot of that happens through these individual one-on-one conversations. But beyond that, the mentor does play a critical role in inspiring and motivating the mentee throughout their time that they're there, all of which are a necessity for helping someone to feel included in a sense of belonging in an organization. And they should be demonstrating acting as a role model and helping to craft a vision for their work. And then beyond that, they also serve as a sponsor, or it should be serving as a sponsor and someone that can help broker connections and create a variety of opportunities for their mentee that they're working with. And what it really boils down to, that there is a key set of core skills that we feel that mentors should have or advisors should have as they're entering into any relationship. And so we've been offering a series of trainings that we call mentoring core skills to really focus on aspects of questioning, listening, how to structure productive conversations, and feedback. I'm sorry that my inbox is going crazy right now. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, our main training modules that we provide to our advisor community is focused around these 4 main topics: the ability to ask impactful questions and the type of questioning you should be doing, really strengthening those listening muscles, because that, again, is a great way to just help people feel valued by showing that you're actively listening. And then structuring conversations for impact. We know oftentimes, especially like postdoc times can be limited. So really making sure every meeting has an opportunity to be impactful. And then the necessity to be able to offer impactful feedback as well will all help to achieving those goals. We could go to the next one. Thank you. So just to quickly touch on each of those, again, this is high level of some of the things that we discuss in our training. And I definitely have to, as I'm talking about the training, give a huge shout out to our collaborator, Norbek Tan from Illumina Executive Coaching. She's been our key facilitator that we've been working with to develop these modules. She's also worked with the National Academies to develop mentoring guides, which I'll drop a link in the chat box so you all can have access to that as well. But these are some of the high-level pieces that we discuss with our advisor communities during our trainings, and give them practical opportunities to actually apply some of these things that they're listening with, okay? And so when we deal with the questioning, right? So questioning is huge when it comes to working with a early career scientist, because how a question is framed can ultimately shape what they feel empowered to do, or if they feel that, perhaps their idea is being dismissed just simply by how you start the question. And so one of the things to focus on when you're working with anybody in this mentoring role is to make sure that you are providing effective questions. So open questions are those that are golden. So those are questions that cannot be simply answered with a yes or no. They should be short, and focused, so that the mentee has an opportunity to process what's being said and be able to provide a thought out answer. They should start with what and how. And the reason being that what and how are often questions you can't answer with just a simple yes or no. They automatically require or push for you to do more reflection on your answer and be able to explore possibilities just by using that what or how statement. And they often don't involve a choice. So do you want to do this or that? Because again, that then limits the scope of where their potential might take them. Questions should be delivered one at a time to avoid, again, kind of overload, and be followed with silence so that there's time for that reflection piece. And once again, avoiding starting with why. The why really is detrimental. And a lot of people are like, well, why? Why is it detrimental? Well, when you ask somebody a question, well, why are you doing that? Why would you start with that method? That automatically puts the defenses up as if what I did was incorrect. So there, on the next slide, if you go to it, there are a lot of other options for how you could be framing your questions to help really keep the minds open, so that that defense mechanism doesn't already go up, and so that they can feel that they can contribute to a conversation without fear of judgment or anything like that. So really focusing on using things like open questions. You can see an example here for all of these. Clarifying questions to help dig deep into why someone's doing it without saying, why are you doing it? Probing to help them really get down to what the ultimate piece that you're trying to do. And filtering to help them understand how to prioritize. The one thing to really avoid, though, is the leading questions, right? So it's obvious that we should include this figure, right? Well, of course, that power dynamic will kick in, and a young researcher may not feel that they can then go against whatever you're saying. If you ultimately say that this figure or whatever should be in this document, then how do I then say kick back? So all of these are some great ways for just opening dialogue so that people feel empowered to have to contribute to conversations as you're going through. Okay. Next slide, please. In addition to the questioning, it's also about your listening. How are you listening? So often people go into any conversation, you probably have experienced this with a loved one at some point in time, where they're really listening and they've already determined what they're going to say before you finish your sentence. And so it's important to, as a mentor or advisor, to check in with yourself and really asking yourself, what is my default listening style? Do I often default to trying to win, understand the win? What are we celebrating? Am I trying to fix something, or am I trying to learn? Right? Because depending on who you're working with, you may have to toggle between those so that you can make sure that you're allowing them to get whatever information out so you can then be most useful. And so when you are dealing with people, different mentees, whomever you're working with, you should ask yourself, would it make sense to be listening to win, to fix, or learn? And then lean into the different types of questions that you can ask, whether that be open, clarifying, probing, or filtering, to determine how to best handle the situation. So your mindset is really key when you start engaging in conversation and making sure you're allowing them the opportunity to get information out. To the next slide, please. Beyond that, not only is it your mindset, it's how are you listening? If you've never heard of active listening, this is something that is, to me, one of the most powerful tools a mentor has in their toolkit when it comes to having productive conversations. Active listening really is going beyond just listening to what people are saying, but actually really, observing everything that they're doing. Really paying attention to body language, and not only their body language, but your body language, making sure that you're holding judgment and not infusing your own thoughts before they get a chance to get it out. If you can go to the next slide, because I have some other notes on this same thing. Actually reflecting and helping to paraphrase the information that you're hearing throughout the conversation. Again, making sure we're clarifying through those open-ended questions and summarizing what's been heard throughout that. That's a great way to just make people feel like their conversation was valued by just kind of repeating things that you're hearing, paraphrasing back, and making sure you're holding back any judgment. And that all goes into helping to establish that trust that we talked about at the very beginning of the advising relationship. And to the next slide, please. In addition to that, so we've talked about questions and how you should be framing questions. We've talked about listening. The other thing is just making sure that you're structuring your conversations for impact. All right. And I'm sure many of you all have experienced this, especially in the pandemic times, that it's very easy to get sidetracked in a meeting. It's very easy to, come to a meeting with no agenda and you just kind of talk. And then you may leave like, oh man, I have no idea what we even talked about. I really don't know what the path forward is. I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing next, right? So I really like this framework. This is an adapted framework from that was provided to us at Georgetown whenever we were getting, well, both myself and Dr. Tan were getting certified in becoming leadership coaches. Is this idea of framing the coaching conversation or the mentoring conversation. And so at the beginning of each formal meeting, doesn't have to be every meeting, but the formal meetings, the check-in points, it's really good to have an agenda set and really just check in with each other. And that could be, the light banter, checking, catching up with what's happened over the weekend. And then, okay, what are we really focusing on for today? Then once we get past that kind of initial check-in, it then really is good to get into clarifying, okay, what are we really, really focusing? What's the priority of this meeting? Are we preparing for a talk? Are we preparing for a performance evaluation? Do you have a manuscript that's ready for submission? You know, what's the priority of today's meeting? You then can use the bulk of the meeting really processing through the topic or topics that have been laid out. And then at the end, really looking to designing action steps beyond. And that's where it's a great opportunity to, again, summarize what we've talked about, decide who's responsible for what action item, and then making sure there's a clear path of understanding for whatever's the next step. And then the big thing is to always invite, especially if the mentor is leading the meeting, to invite the mentee an opportunity to really say what they've learned or what they're taking from this meeting. Again, you'll really realize how impactful just giving those moments of opportunity to reflect and reiterate things that they're taking from a conversation, how impactful they can be in making someone feel, again, valued, seen, and heard in a conversation. And then if we could go to the next slide. And then, of course, the other big piece that's really important that a mentor will offer is this feedback piece. Feedback is always so important on both sides, quite honestly. There's feedback needed from the mentor to the mentee, and from the mentee to the mentor, because sometimes as a mentor, you may think that you're showing up the way that a mentee needs, but it may be hard, you may have to adapt your style. And so it's important that there's this, that trust is there to be able to offer open lines of communication and open opportunities for feedback. Feedback should always, I like what someone else had said before, is that, if there's going to be some type of negative feedback or negative, feedback coming to it, that there's also some reassurance provided along with that. And that's critical, because again, you don't want to break someone down and not then just leave them in that broken down state. It's important to make sure that feedback that's being offered is positive and constructive if needed, and can really help them develop in some sort of way. So, I noticed this, maybe we can try that type of thing. And of course, you can use feedback at various points of your mentoring, whether that be situational, perhaps after a specific event, or continuous throughout, or through those formal performance assessments that really get to the nitty gritty of how someone's doing. But the feedback really is important to make sure that on both ends, the goals are being met. And then if we can go to the next slide, and then just some considerations, empathy is really important when it comes to delivering feedback. So making sure that you are allowing time, especially if maybe it was a bombed talk or something. You don't really want to go to that person right after they've not had the best talk of their life to say, you know what, could have been better. So just really allowing time and being considerate of when you're delivering a particular message. And anticipating what reactions might come, so that you can then be prepared to dive into deeper conversations and help to manage emotions as the conversation is going. Again, providing context behind why or what it is that you're bringing to the table, because some people, they assume things should be obvious, but that awareness piece could be lacking. And so providing context, concrete examples of what did work or what didn't work is always useful. And practicing discernment, again, knowing when is the appropriate time, what's the right way to be delivering the message should always be at the forefront. So I'll just conclude by really just saying, through the use of, turning on your coaching hat or turning on your mentoring hat in any of these advising relationships can really help you to empower your workforce. And so again, just really focus on building trust and establishing those meaningful relationships, working together to actually design an action plan that helps to reach both goals of the mentor and the mentee. Using those impactful questions, that's where the coaching really comes into play, those impactful questions and active listening, and offering feedback and always remember to celebrate all wins. And so I know that was a really quick, high level touch point. We do give deep dive workshops. These are normally like 4-hour workshops that we go through with our communities. But I did want to also just drop in the chat for you all a link to some mentoring guides that were created with our partner that have some really great in-depth practical things that you could be doing right now. So with that, you guys see my email address. Happy to answer any questions, but I will turn it back to our moderator to head to the next speaker. Once again, thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Janetta. I've learned so much and have been going in my head over all the conversations I've had with my mentees during that entire conversation. But yes, so much that information there. And I hope you've been seeing the chat that everyone has been so engaged with all of these presentations. And so I'm going to turn this over to Melissa Mcdaniels. And I just want to highlight that she has the honor of being the only repeat Lab of the Future seminar speaker. So quite an honor. Or she just has glutton for punishment. But so Dr. Mcdaniels is the Associate Executive Director and Associate Scientist at the Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences in Research, or CIMR, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She is a co-investigator and community advancement manager for the NIH-supported National Research Mentoring Network, and is also leading a project as part of the American Physical Society's NSF Includes Inclusive Graduate Education Network, or IGEN. From 2008 to 2012, Mcdaniels served as the director of Michigan State University's NSF Advanced Grant, where she spearheaded the institution's efforts to diversify the faculty and STEM fields. In this role, she was responsible for the development and implementation of MSU's new faculty mentoring policy. Prior to working at MSU, she held full-time positions at Northeastern University, Boston College, and National Geographic Society. She has over 20 years of experience in graduate student and faculty development, undergraduate and graduate teaching and learning, and organizational change. And with that, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Susanna. And good afternoon to everyone who at least is on Mountain Time, Central Time, or Eastern Time. My name is Melissa Mcdaniels, and I've been asked to talk a little bit today about really for all of you who are managers of any level, leaders of any level, who are trying to think about what can you do to support inclusive research mentorship at your institutions. I wanted to do a note, and I'll show this at the very end of my talk. I created a Google Doc that has open access that will contain links to the resources I share throughout this talk, and you will see it up at the top of my screen here, https, it's a bit.ly link, DOE Mentorship, January 2022. So again, I want to recognize and thank, obviously, my fellow panelists, the colleagues at the Department of Energy that have been working so hard to produce this incredibly important series, as well as many national laboratory colleagues, DOE lab colleagues that I know are on this webinar right now. It's great to see new friends as well as old. So I'm going to do 4 things today, and this is really going to be, let's just call it a tasting menu at the 10,000 foot level, because I do want to honor some time for audience questions for all of the speakers. So first, I want to amplify resources that come from both my center, but a lot of other places that may be helpful to you in moving forward with your work. I'm going to be talking a little bit about, when you are working in research institutions, being able to make the case for why what you're doing and pushing for is important in language of researchers that's accessible. So I'm going to briefly talk about a few components of the research. I'm then going to step back, and actually this is going to be some recommendations for institutional leaders. But particularly I'm going to focus on some of the work we are partnering with about 11 of the national labs to do related to supporting inclusive excellence in those organizations. So briefly, the Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences in Research, we are an organization with a goal of improving research mentoring relationships for mentees and mentors. So we talk about mentorship. at all career stages, across disciplines, through the development and implementation of evidence-based and culturally responsive interventions. So again, what that translates to is we engage in a lot of mentorship education, we engage in curriculum development and testing, and we engage in research. And again, I have a link in my resource document to us. I am also here, and particularly Simmer's work with the labs has been funded through the APS awarded grant for the Inclusive Graduate Education Network that's really focusing on the diversity in the physical sciences. And the component that Simmer has been working on, has really had the honor to work on, has been we've been asked to bring a mentorship education, a mentor training model that we tested a lot, especially in the biomedical sciences, in higher ed institutions and academic hospitals, to see how could this be effective and useful in the national laboratory context. And again, I should probably sort of go with saying the structures and cultures of the different labs are different, but there are some shared properties that allowed us to make some tweaks to the original curriculum and hopefully make it useful to folks on the ground. In addition to developing the curriculum, we delivered this fall a Train the Trainer program. So again, we had about 27 individuals, some of whom are on this call, from the labs, learn not just about the curriculum, but practice implementing as well as planning for implementation. And then finally, and this piece is going to be starting in the next month or so, we've been asked to promote a community of practice among our new trained facilitators. The third resource I want to point out is one that, or two, that I will be using a lot through my talk. The National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and I want to give a shout out to Maria Dahlberg, who I think is on this call. There are really many important consensus studies, but two in particular I wanted to bring your attention to, and I have links to these in my resource page. One is the Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM. This was rolled out in October 2019. I had the pleasure of partnering with Maria on trying to disseminate this in the Big Ten Academic Alliance. And then there is another report that came out, I think, Maria can tell you in chat, maybe a few months before or after, on mental health and wellness in higher education. But again, I think a lot of the ideas, we're talking about trainees of all different levels who are engaged in learning. So whether it be at a laboratory and university, I think there'll be some really important pieces to bring away from that report as well. So like the previous panelists did, I wanted to offer a definition, and this is a definition I think that the previous panelists gave, but this is a definition offered by the National Academies report. Talks about mentorship itself as a working alliance that goes over time, where partners work together, and really with this aim of providing career support functions as well as psycho support functions. This is not to say within this relationship, sponsorship, coaching, and some of those advising and some of those other terms that you hear can happen within that relationship. But again, research mentorship, this is the definition we are using here. There's a wonderful paper by Dr. Barana and Montgomery that I can add to my resource list that offers some differences in definitions between mentorship and advising that you might find useful. So I think the first question is, what does the scholarship say about why we should be concerned about cultures of inclusive mentorship? And so I just want to be really clear. What I'm emphasizing right now is what is the evidence that shows institutions need to look at their climates, their policies, their practices that have maybe traditionally excluded a lot of people, and particularly non-white folks. And so one of the things you'll see at the beginning of the report talks about there is a science of mentorship. I won't read through that right now. But one of the big conclusions is that identities of various types affect the quality, let's just call it, of mentoring relationships in STEM. So identities of both someone who you might consider more senior and more junior, specific dimensions of identity like science identity, being able to see yourself as a part of the science profession. Cultural identities have really been linked to academic and career development, as well as just the broader experience of mentoring relationships in STEM. We also know that mentorship, if it is high quality, there can be tour mentorship as well. If mentorship can ameliorate the negative effects of trainees' feelings of being othered due to non-science identities. So that's another important conclusion from the huge review of the research that was done. And again, this will not be a surprise to this group here, but individuals from historically and currently excluded groups have differential experiences of mentorship. So students or trainees from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups report their primary advisor is less respectful of their ideas as compared to white students. White men are more likely to benefit from the impact of their novel innovations than underrepresented women and men and white women. Most of you probably may have heard of the Ginther report in 2011 that was found that white investigators applying for R01 awards were more likely in getting those awards than Black and Latinx investigators, and inadequate mentoring was posited as one of those reasons. And then finally, the research has definitely shown that trainees have unequal access to mentoring and quality mentorship. So again, this adds to your sort of conceptual toolbox when you're talking to your colleague. You are concerned about talent development at your labs. In order to really build the greatest pool possible, it is being able to recruit, retain, promote, and advance the most diverse group of colleagues possible. Finally, recognizing not in responding to cultural identities contributes to mentorship effectiveness. So again, when I say responding, it means naming, seeing, telling people you see their identities. And this is one of the trickiest things that I've found mentors are worried about, particularly mentors of majority group, of, ooh, I shouldn't bring up this difference between us in terms of race and ethnicity. But the research has shown that mentoring, addressing cultural diversity matters, and psychosocial needs of diverse students, it's positively correlated with their science identity, commitment to research career, and satisfaction. So again, one of the wonderful things, I'm an organizational studies person by background. I love the 300 pages of the National Academies report. You do not need to read those 300 pages of the National Academies report to look at a little bit of these outcomes. And again, I have a link to a very accessible online report that summarizes this research in my document. So as I was asked to talk about, how do we create as institutional leaders a culture of effective mentorship? And so what the National Academies report did, in addition to asking questions about what mentorship is, under what conditions, who does it work for, it comes out with a set of 9 recommendations. They're a fairly powerful set of recommendations for institutional leadership. Again, the focus of this report was on mentorship of undergraduate and graduate students. However, I think there are some directly translatable ideas there that individuals concerned about mentoring early career faculty, early career scientists, and postdocs can benefit from. So again, there are a set of 7 recommendations, and they are divided by the type of position you have. And then the final 2 sets of recommendations are directed at agencies like the Department of Energy and others that fund mentorship programs. So basically the results said that research institutions can broaden their access to quality mentorship and support systems if they do a number of different things. And these are 6 bullets. One is use an evidence-based approach to supporting mentorship. What I'm going to be talking about next provides some examples of those, and you've already heard of some of those today. It also recommended that institutions establish and use structured feedback systems to improve mentorship. Recognize and respond to identities in mentorship. Support multiple mentorship structures. It's very easy for all of us, especially when we sort of see that definition of mentorship, to think the dyad. Mentoring relationships can occur not just in dyads, but in groups. And there's all these different structures that have been shown to broaden and deepen the exposure of individuals to quality mentorship. Reward and incentivize mentorship. So again, how is scientist efforts on trying to move mentorship in their division recognized in their raises and their annual review? And then finally, and this won't be a surprise to you, institutions that strongly that they have a process, individuals, offices that will serve to mitigate and prevent negative mentorship experiences. So as I said, what I'm going to talk about next is what we have been doing with the iGen support in the national labs related to this first recommendation. So the first, so again, this is through the iGen grant that SIMR has partnered with. Some of you on this webinar know that from, it was 2019 to 2021, really, there is a team of us, myself, and some colleagues from Argonne National Lab, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and the MAG Lab that worked together to look at this initially tested. When I say tested, it was tested through a randomized controlled trial with Mentors in Medicine to see how we could make this curriculum speak to the structural and cultural differences that and uniqueness that national labs have. And so this curriculum or training approach, and by the way, this is going to be, this is open access, and we are going to be posting this on the SIMR website quite shortly. And on the resource sheet that I provided you with, you can enter your name and email address if you would like to receive a copy of this. So again, the audience is individuals who may serve in a mentoring capacity, regardless of what their title is. So in a lab, it could be a research supervisor, a technical manager, a formally assigned career mentor of postdocs or graduate students. Again, the audience is for individuals who want to refine their mentorship skills regardless of their appointed role. There are a series of competencies, many of which have been reflected in some of the best practices that were shared previously, again, that are measurable and topics, important topics like equity and inclusion. Some of the competencies go deep, sort of a semi-deep dive on that. But again, the SIMR product recognizes that all mentorship happens within a cultural context. The curriculum includes facilitation guides. It includes examples. For example, I know Tina Henn from Argonne is on this call, things that Tina has been doing at Argonne National Lab. It includes some tips on handling facilitation challenges when you're working with your colleagues and you have people that are a little resistant to talking about these issues. How do you handle that? As well as participant materials. And a large number pieces of this are case studies, okay? So that is sort of an overview of it. So the step one was spend a couple years developing this. This past October, we had 11 labs, 27 participants who participated in a workshop that did a number of things that I will talk about in 1 second. But one, it gave participants the experience of basically taking this training, taking the training that they will ultimately deliver. They learned a little bit more about the science of mentorship. They also practiced facilitating to build their self-confidence and familiarity with the materials. And finally, they spent some time trying to really plan, okay, if I bring this back to my laboratory, who am I going to partner with? Who might I deliver this to first? Who are some people I need to gain support for? So the facilitating entering mentoring workshop was a comprehensive one that looked across both sort of familiarity with the content, but also implementation. And this is, for my eyesight, even a little too small, so I apologize, but the folks that participated this fall were from Argonne, Brookhaven, Goddard Space Flight Center, Jet Propulsion Lab, 2 NASA research labs, Lawrence Berkeley, Lawrence Livermore, Los Alamos, the MAG Lab, and Oak Ridge and Sandia. So it was a really great group, and I would say all but 4 of the participants came with a colleague from their institution. At the end of this the trainer, again, at Simmer, yes, we deliver mentorship education, but we're trying to build capacity for individuals to deliver this work without us out in the field. And so at the end of this training, every single participant became a certified trained facilitator of Simmer, and all of the benefits that provides, categories like access to resources, access to community. Finally, the step 3 of this project, which we've just gotten funding for, and actually those of you on the call who were in that facilitator training, you will be hearing from me before the end of this week. We got resources to support a community of practice. So we hope to be supporting monthly coffee hours, a trained facilitator newsletter, some online conversational space, and also some additional training opportunities. Some of you may know that my colleague, Dr. Angela Byers-Winston, who was also the chair of the National Academies report, she and some colleagues developed an 8-hour intensive culturally aware mentorship training. And so in the future, these trained facilitators will have some additional access to these materials and training. So that was a lot, but I wanted to sort of just give you the perspective of a little bit of research, some recommended institutional best practices, and then to highlight at a very high level the work we've been doing, and again, now hopefully partnering with the Department of Energy of supporting in the years to come. So with that, Susanna, I just briefly want to show people the worksheet I developed. It has an interest form, and it has the links to all of the National Academies resources, the Inclusive Graduate Education Network, as well as some Simmer information, a sample of some of the things. I keep highlighting Argonne, but Tina, you've done such great work. And then finally, based upon what someone said, as one of the speakers said, we wrote an article talking about tips for remote mentorship during the big pivot that we went through 2 years ago, but I think it's still really important now. So with that, I'm going to stop, Susanna. I know I talked fast, but I hope this gives some time for participants to ask questions of all of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you can throw the link there in the chat, and I can also send it out after the webinar to make sure that everyone has seen it.
Perfect, thanks.
And first, I just want to start our Q&A session by thanking Victoria DeStefano, because she is largely responsible for this unbelievable workshop. So great job. And hopefully I was able to get her to be able to share her video. Yes, there she is. Okay, great. And I'm going to turn the Q&A chair over to Victoria. And we had so many questions come in. It's kind of unbelievable. So apologies, we are not going to be able to get through them all, but we'll do our best.
Yes, thank you everyone for all the great questions. So I'm Victoria DeStefano. I'm a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow, and I'm currently on detail to the Office of the Undersecretary of Science and Energy, but I was formerly in the Office of Science that came up with this presentation and workshop for you today. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. We've talked a lot, and some of you have discussed this a little bit, but the last couple of years, COVID has really forced us to do a lot of virtual mentorship. So I want to go ahead and ask, how do we adapt these activities to promote belonging, and what are some of the lessons learned for mentorship that you have kind of come across in your work?
Who was this question targeted at?
Anyone who wants to step in.
I'll start. I mentioned a few things during my talk that I think we can use to do this. I mean, that some of the online tools that we all have become more familiar with the pandemic allow us to potentially connect better with mentees in a variety of ways. I know one example I have is we had Drexel is the lead institution for a Louis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation group that has 9 institutions. And over the years, we've tried to do a variety of activities to bring students together, to provide mentorship and talking about things like experiential learning and how to get involved and things like research experiences. And prior to the pandemic, that was really difficult because we tried to do this physically. We tried to bring students together physically, and that was potentially disadvantaging because students are coming from institutions that are, in the greater Philadelphia area and a lot of different locations. And so with the pandemic, we decided to offer these virtually, and we were able to bring students together from multiple institutions to hear about these things in a way that was beneficial to them. There's efficiencies, there's economies of scale here. And so when you think about something like mentoring groups of students going through something, you could have activities like this, where there's a panel or there's a workshop to train a large number of students. So that's one example, and I'll allow my co-panelists to share.
Yeah, I think that, I agree with everything that Jen said. I think that the big challenge is that is one of engagement. So I think that you have to really think through the types of activities that you're going to put together, putting people in small groups, having someone take on the role of active participation, having them, complete let's say a Google Doc that then comes back. And so always thinking about those small things about keeping people engaged, because there's a danger of, especially with the students, they come in and then they're off doing something else. I mean, I think we even do that, faculty end up doing that. So just thinking through, how do you deliberately engage them and make sure that you're hearing everyone's voice and that they have an opportunity to contribute.
If I could just piggyback on that, I would also go with the word intentional, being intentional with meeting schedules. We've lost the luxury of being able to just pop into someone's office and say, hey, real quick, can I show you this, this graph or this data or this piece? So really just being intentional with those meetings, being intentional with introductions is also critical. Setting up meet and greets, coffee hours, virtual engagement opportunities is really critical in these times.
I'll go ahead and move on to another question. We had a couple questions come in about rewarding and incentivizing mentorship. It's a heavy burden for a lot of researchers, specifically in the laboratory environment. So do you guys have any ideas how institutions or funding agencies can support, or how a lab management can support these kind of activities?
I have lots of ideas. I don't know that they'll all get implemented, but, I think this really speaks to some of the things that some of my co-panelists were saying about, there's value to an institution in mentorship because of retention, because of all of these different things. And so I think there needs to be an intentional thought process, the reflection that we've talked about with regards to, is it valued? If it's valued, then it needs to be incentivized and there needs to be time for it. And will you be penalized for doing it, right? So if you feel as an employee that you're going to be penalized for spending your time on this, then you're not going to feel like you want to do it. So if an institution feels that this is something that they value, and they should, for all the reasons that have been discussed today, then it has to be properly incentivized. Now, incentivization can have multiple forms, right? Like the first thing everyone thinks about is money, right? Time is an incentive as well. And one of the things that you can do, if you think about the academic model, which the academic model is not the be all end all, and there's lots of issues and challenges that need to be fixed, but we have, for faculty that you have to engage in teaching, research, and service. And so similarly at other types of institutions, you could potentially have a model where people have to engage in research and something else. And maybe the something else is mentorship, or maybe it's outreach, or maybe it's something else. And so having that be part of your job expectations and the way that you get evaluated could be a way to incentivize. And I'll let my co-panelists give their perspectives. Melissa has her hand up.
Yeah, I think this came up quite a bit when we did our facilitator training. And one of the things that was exciting we had a number of different people with different specialties in this training. About half of the folks had leadership roles in postdoc offices and diversity offices. Half of them had fairly senior division director roles. And so from a couple of the division directors said, look, there actually are some discretionary funds that I can potentially get allocated to allow our trainers to go out and do the work that we hope that they will do. Because again, when you're obviously working in a space where you have different sponsors, what is the line item that you use to sort of pay for that effort? So I think that it was a shared concern across the board, but I was hopeful in hearing from some of the senior folks there that with the some of the strategic planning that's happening in the labs, that there might be some allocations in that regard. So I just wanted to offer that.
From the academic point of view, we heard a lot about invisible service. And so, and it goes back to what everyone said, it has to be very, we were really focused on setting workload policies, being very explicit what the evidence is if you are doing mentoring, and then how do you make sure it's effective mentoring, that it's impactful, right? Not someone just putting it down. So we're really, from an academic hat, we're trying to really begin the process of articulating it. Everyone says they value it. And to Jen's point, now we have to show that there's the actions behind it that show that it is indeed valuable.
Yes, thank you all. One question too that I know that we have all probably discussed individually, but I know some of you have experiences in lab environments. What kind of differences are there specific to laboratory researchers as they think about mentoring versus other settings? And are there some other additional tools that they can use?
So from my perspective, and again, this is from the community that I work with, one of the big things that comes up is just being able to come to a consensus of what productivity means from the standpoint of an advisor versus the postdoc or the early career researcher. For some people, productivity simply means getting X number of publications out. And for others, it's like, oh, were you able to go make connections? So I think having that consensus of what productivity means is really critical. And then I think the other piece is that we often default to mentoring, in the scientific realm on the technical expertise, making sure you can run some instrument and so forth, but really making sure we're lending our mentoring tools to actually help them advance careers, prepare resumes, prepare communication skills so that they can go out and get the next job, and recognize that it's important not to infuse your own thoughts or biases of what, if you have a postdoc that wants to go work at a, community college, and if you feel that that's not high enough esteem, that can really squash someone's, motivation to want to come work. So I think it's just giving consideration to the fact that people have different ideas of where their STEM career is going to take them, and be able to assist them along the way.
Melissa, did you have something?
I have a few things, but I really want to leave space for some of my other colleagues to respond. And I know we only have a minute left.
Why don't you go ahead?
So most of my work again has been working in universities and colleges and academic medical centers. And so it really was back in 2017 where we were asked out to one of the major DOE labs to run some mentorship education programs for both some of the postdocs and their mentors. We were asked out in 17 and then 18. And during that time, it was quite clear that there were some differences with this lab. Again, not all labs are alike. Some are much more marked by cultures of higher ed. But the one we went to, one of the things that really came across from the trainees' perspective is you have technical managers and you have PIs. And both of those people play really important roles in your professional development. But how do you negotiate, align expectations, set up communication practices when you don't just have that one PI that you're working with? And that was particularly a transition for people who just came out of, doctoral programs.
Well, there are so many wonderful questions that I could ask you all. And thank you so much for your time, but we are at the end of our panel today. So I want to thank you all for attending, and I'm going to pass it back to Susanna And feel free to add additional things in the chat if you'd like.
Apologies, I think we've reached our maximum limit on the number of hosts who can share video. So I'm just going to be a disembodied voice, but I'm just so thankful to all of our speakers. This was such an amazing webinar, and I'm very appreciative of your time. And I mean, judging from all the feedback, everyone else got just as much out of this as I did. And stay tuned. We will send out the presentations as well as a recording of the webinar following once we get it all back from IT. And stay tuned for the next in our series of Labs of the Future workshops. And have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
colleagues, fellow panelists. Great to meet you.
Good to meet
Bye.
you too.